I want to tackle some of the big issues that people have on the top of their list for coming up for the election and what they want to see Congress accomplish. And I'm sure you're hearing this from your constituents when you come home, but the economy and inflation seem to be the #1 issue right now. Is there anything happening in Congress right now that would move us in the right direction where we could see easing of inflation, or that we wouldn't be spending as much and creating as much of a debt issue right now?
Yeah, sadly, a lot of what's been happening in Congress moves us in the wrong direction. We're spending too much, about $2 trillion a year more than we have, and that makes everything more expensive. And so as a result, in this economy, Joe Biden's economy, everything costs more. We're at a time when over 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And meanwhile, Congress continues to add to a national debt that's about to blow past $35 trillion. Inflation was at 1.4%, remember, when President Biden took over. And then today, things have changed. It cost about $2.39 a gallon, I think, to fill up your car before he took office. And then you move forward to today, and the prices have jumped 18% across the board, with gasoline about 40% more expensive compared to the day he took office. So that's a big deal.
So the question is, how do we solve this? Because I have a stack of things from candidates right now on my counter, and everyone says they're going to go against the Biden administration or they're going to fix the budget. But those campaign promises are not easy to keep. I've watched a lot of your votes over the last couple of years where you're often the no vote, where you don't want to spend the money for a bill that just is larger than you're saying is acceptable. The problem is Republicans are not all on the same page, and we saw that kind of play out with Congressman Celeste Maloy recently, when there was a little bit of, it seems like, an inter-party squabble going on, whether you try to go about your way where you hit home runs and then cut the budget, or you take little wins at a time. What is the smartest way forward? Because right now it doesn't seem like there's a lot of ground being made.
Yeah, there's not. There's not ground being made, because again and again you see these spending bills that spend $2 trillion a year more than we have, and you see all Democrats voting for them and enough Republicans for them to pass in both houses of Congress. And when you do that, the distinctions between the two parties tend to blur. Remember that Nobel laureate economist Milton Friedman used to say that the true cost of government is measured not by the tax rate so much as the rate of government spending as a percentage of the economy. And that when government, especially our federal government, which has the ability to print more money as it borrows more money by issuing treasury instruments of debt, it just reduces the value of each dollar. And so this is the predictable, foreseeable, and in fact foreseen and warned of result of spending $2 trillion a year more than we have. Everything buys less than it used to. And so for people like most Americans who live more or less paycheck to paycheck on a fixed income, that really hurts. Utahns are seeing that their average monthly expenses are up $1,300 a month every single month relative to the day before President Biden took office.
Republicans and Democrats, I think, are equally over the last couple of decades responsible for that burgeoning debt and the part of the inflation that we're seeing right now. You obviously are trying to take a hard stand against that, but how do you make a difference? Because right now, as you can see, the Republicans are kind of split on how to do this, and in politics, it's all about addition. Are you working with other congressional leaders to figure out a way forward where we're talking about the budget more than a couple weeks before it's getting voted on, or what are you working on right now that could make a difference?
Yeah, always. I mean, look, among other things, it's important for us to acknowledge the relationship between inflation and, the cost of living and government spending. A lot of members don't connect the two, and they don't realize there's a difference. Or they, in theory, they'll connect it, but don't really connect it to the particular vote that they're casting at that moment. And because they can point to good things that a particular spending bill does, and say those are good things, then they justify all that and say, well, you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. But that overlooks the fact that the big picture of this is very, very harmful. And that's why we are in as much debt as we are today, but more importantly, more immediately. It's why life has become unaffordable, especially in Utah.
Is there any chance that, as we're seeing between now and the election, that there might be something that happens in Congress that could take us in the right direction? Or are we at a point where nothing's going to get accomplished until we have an election and then people start working together again?
It's a good question. I doubt that you will see a sea change between now and then, based on the makeup of this Congress in both chambers and the membership of both parties in each chamber. You're unlikely to see a sea change in that, with one caveat. There is a caveat here, which is we are now spending so much of our money on interest on the national debt. This year, it's expected, as of today, based on rates as they are today, to exceed $1.1 trillion this year. Keep in mind, just a few years ago, we were spending between $300 and $400 billion a year, which is also an extraordinary sum of money. But we're talking now about many multiples of that, significantly in excess of what we're spending on defense. And this runs afoul of what some have called I think it's referred to as the Ferguson principle, which is that the minute a nation is spending more on interest on its sovereign debt than it is on defense, things are really, really grim. So the laws of mathematics are catching up to us, and that's why I would say that if anything stops us between now and the election at least, it may just be the mathematical realities we may face, especially if Treasury yield rates continue to increase.
Tomorrow I'm hosting a summit on Social Security, and every time I talk to voters that are either getting close to cashing in on their Social Security or are, they're worried about the solvency of it, and 10 years sounds like a long time, and so maybe we're too far away for people to be scared enough to change something, but we do know that it's not going to be solvent in 10 years and that people who are getting those checks are going to get a cut of at least 25%. Is there anything you're working on right now or looking at with your other colleagues that could help people at home who are saying, hey, you know, I'm worried about being able to pay the bills in the coming years? Yeah.
First of all, for people on Social Security or about to start on receiving Social Security benefits, no indication that that's going, that the Social Security Trust Fund is going to run dry such that those benefits can't be paid in the immediate future. But I am worried about what happens just a few years down the road when the funds start to run dry. That is deeply problematic. It's one of the reasons why one of the first things I did when I arrived in the Senate in 2011 was to introduce legislation that would establish its long-term actuarial soundness for the program by making modest adjustments to the retirement age a little bit each year until we reached a point that was based on a reference to life expectancy. You make a few tweaks like that, over time it can make a big difference. Had we done that then, we wouldn't have any reason to be concerned about it. But since then, notwithstanding that and other reforms I've proposed over many years, and those have been largely unheeded, we've continued not only to spend like there's no tomorrow, we've also raided the Social Security Trust Fund. And so we're burning the candle at both ends, and we've made it that much more difficult to save it. There's still ways of doing it, but we've got to get on it, and members have to stop whistling past the graveyard and pretending there's no concern.
Is it going to take getting close to the cliff of that 10 years where people get nervous enough that they feel like they have to do something about it?
I fear so. It need not, but I fear that it will, absent a sea change. I mean, I hope that we'll see some change after this year's election in a willingness to address the reality that we face. The so-called mandatory spending portion of what we spend is getting bigger and bigger, both in nominal terms and as a percentage of overall federal spending. And so we can't ever get to the point where we control our debt and deficit without dealing with both the mandatory and the discretionary side of federal spending.
I know Senator Romney is looking for a commission on that. Would you support that going forward in sitting down and trying to figure out what the right steps are in that regard?
Yeah, you know, there are a number of different proposals out there. I don't remember all the ins and outs of his approach. I think that sort of thing can be helpful. I don't know that it will be the solution in the end, because in the end, a committee or a commission or a task force can look at those proposals and recommend them. And some of them might be quite good, but none of those things are things that we couldn't do on our own right now without an ancillary process to fall back on and to say, let's wait until this or that commission resolves its work, which may take, I don't know, a year or two. So things like that can bear some good fruit, but I don't think we necessarily need to wait for that to pass or for a commission like that to do its work. Let's be the commission. Let's be the committee.
Speaking of right now on another issue, I think at this point Democrats and Republicans would both agree that there is a crisis on our southern border right now. Some Democrats, just as of today, look like they're ready to bring up another bill again and see if they can get something accomplished. It sounds like Republicans are saying this isn't going to work. In your opinion, is there anything in that bill that would get us in the right direction? And if not, what would get us in the right direction?
All right, so look, the short answer to your question is I think H.R. 2, as passed by the House of Representatives a year ago Thursday, it's been sitting in the Senate for the 367 or 8 days since then, untouched by the Senate. I do think that would get us moving firmly in the right direction. We've tried to bring that up. We've tried to get it for a vote in just a little while. I'll be going back to the Senate floor this evening as part of an effort to get that bill and another bill I have called the Stopping Border Surges Act that is a subset of H.R. 2 that would help move us in the right direction. One of the things I want to do is offer those up seeking unanimous consent, not to pass them unanimously necessarily, but just tee them up so that we can agree upon a process by which we could vote on those things. In the meantime, Senator Schumer all along has been refusing to bring up H.R. 2 or Stopping Border Surges for a vote. Meanwhile, he's trying to revive an already failed bill that, in the name of border security, actually undermines it. Quite arguably, under this administration, in the hands of President Biden, it would do more to undermine border security than enhance it.
What
so if the Democrats
specifically in that bill undermines it? Because I don't think
Yeah.
everyone's read the bill. What's the part where you're like, this is a no-go?
Okay, so there are a number of features in there. One of the more egregious ones is that it gives a new authority, analogous to Title 42 authority, for the president to crack down on the border, to, as they say, shut down the border for certain purposes. But that discretionary authority starts to kick in only after they've seen 4,000, and I think it's 4,000 illegal migrant encounters per day. That's a pretty big number. And if what you're saying is that he lacks, I believe courts would be likely to interpret that as saying whatever authority the president has now, prior to the passage of this bill, were it to pass, that authority would then be made contingent upon and remain dormant until such time as we had more than 4,000 per day. And so, if anything, I think this could be used as an excuse to allow more illegal immigration across our southern border.
Senator Trump, when he was in, former President Trump, when he was in office, used executive order to slow the flow at the border, and we saw that somewhat work. It didn't solve all of our immigration issues. President Biden got rid of that. Is this an issue right now where President Biden could, by executive order, get us in the right direction, or is this something that Congress should be acting on?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Look, make no mistake, while we've got legislation that we think would help, largely because bills like H.R. 2 and Stopping Border Surges would limit President Biden's discretion to allow this border surge to continue, so that legislation would be helpful. He doesn't have to have anything passed in order to secure the border. In other words, he could stop this. He could stop most of it, the overwhelming majority of it, he could stop right now under existing law. So in that sense, you don't have to have new law. If we are going to act on a new law, we want it to narrow the president's discretion, not expand it, so as to make it less likely rather than more that these border surges will continue. And yeah, President Trump did bring that down. And long before he ever went to Title 42, the operational control of the border had largely been achieved prior to that, not through Title 42, but through programs like the Migrant Protection Protocol, also known as Remain in Mexico. If someone's coming here and they're crossing over our border without papers, and they apply for asylum, they ought to be sent back to Mexico, and they need to wait in Mexico until such time as the merits of their asylum claim can be processed, because the overwhelming majority, I mean, we're talking 95+% of the people who apply for asylum are ultimately deemed not eligible for asylum. If you require them to wait outside the United States, you're going to bring down the traffic being brought up by the drug cartels. Now, that's bad for the cartels, but good for Americans. What President Biden is doing is really good for cartels and bad for Americans. Keep in mind, the cartels have made tens of billions of dollars every single year smuggling humans, and with them, drugs and other things. They've profited to the tune of tens of billions of dollars a year, specifically because of Biden's deliberately lax border enforcement policy.
What do you believe it'll take for Republicans and Democrats to sit together then and figure out this issue? Because I think that in the last couple of years, states, whether they're run by Democrats or Republicans, are realizing that this might not just be a southern border state issue, but this is an issue for the entire country. What is it going to take for people to sit down together and figure this out? Because I'm assuming that we have the minds in this country to figure out the problem, whether it's figuring out DACA or even just the immediate border crisis. But what will it take in your mind?
Look, it doesn't even take that much. All it takes is a president who's willing to enforce the law, and a president who is not defiantly determined to make it easier for the drug cartels to thwart the law and to circumvent it altogether. When people come into this country without papers, they apply for asylum, they should be detained. That's what is supposed to happen under existing law until such time as their claims have been adjudicated with regard to their asylum. If we did it the way President Trump did it, lawfully within his authority, they'd have to remain in Mexico. That would cut it down dramatically, just as it did the last time we did this. So it's not all that complicated. This is not rocket science. All that's required is to have a president who's willing to enforce the law. And that is ultimately the fundamental objective of the executive branch of government, and the President of the United States is the living embodiment of and the head of the executive branch.
As we're talking about immigration, this is an issue that states are looking at right now as they're looking at elections, and we're looking ahead to primaries in November about whether some of these immigrants who have come across the border illegally will be allowed to vote in the upcoming election. I understand that you have a bill right now, the SAVE Act, that would possibly change that. Tell me what the bill is and what it would accomplish.
Yeah, no, thanks for asking about that. The SAVE Act is something I introduced just a couple of weeks ago after becoming aware of a problem. It's a problem that takes several steps to grasp, but in a nutshell, in 1993, Congress passed a law called the NVRA, also known as Motor Voter. It allows people to register to vote, including to register to vote in federal elections when they apply for a driver's license. All you have to do is check a box, sign your name, certifying that you're a citizen and that you want to register to vote, including in federal elections. A couple decades later, the Supreme Court interpreted the NVRA as prohibiting state officials, when processing those forms, from requiring any kind of documentation or other proof of citizenship. Remember, under federal criminal law, it is prohibited. It is a crime for a non-citizen to vote in a federal election. But when the Supreme Court, a couple decades after the NVRA was passed, interprets the NVRA as saying you may not require any kind of proof of citizenship, that created this nasty recipe, because we have now an estimated right around 30 million, we think perhaps just shy of 30 million non-citizens in the United States. And in all 50 states and the District of Columbia, you can apply for and obtain a driver's license if you're a non-citizen, which means that under the NVRA, you can also check that box and sign your name. All you have to do, it's on the honor system. If you do that knowingly or unknowingly as to what you're doing, you're registered to vote, and you can vote in a federal election, and the state can't ask for proof of your citizenship. So the SAVE Act, this bill that I introduced a couple weeks ago, would close that loophole. Look, when you start a new job, you fill out an I-9. You have to prove citizenship. You have to birth certificate, passport, something like that, that shows that you are a citizen. Why not require the same when you register to vote in a federal election?
I think some people and a lot of Democrats right now would say if they're living in our country, they've got jobs, they're paying taxes, why not let them vote?
Yeah. Okay, so because federal law prohibits that, and I think it should prohibit that. After all, what is a country? What is a system that operates in a constitutional republic like ours, unless being a citizen means something such that citizenship has real significance? In any event, whether you agree with that policy or not, it is the law, and we're kind of making a mockery of the law insofar as we ignore that and just say, let them vote anyway.
Speaking of the law right now, we're seeing the international courts calling right now for a court process to happen with Benjamin Netanyahu and also with Hamas. Your thoughts on that?
First of all, the United States has never ratified the treaty creating the International Criminal Court at The Hague, and with good reason. I hope to shout we never do ratify that, because this is the kind of lawless action that often stems in that kind of environment, especially the words international and criminal and court should never be used all in the same title, because it leads to a certain amount of lawlessness and a lack of accountability. In this circumstance, we've got living proof of that. They've gone after the head of government in the state of Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and they are trying to bring him within their criminal processes just for defending his country. This is ridiculous. There's a pretty strong pro-Hamas bias in all of this that's evident in what they're doing.
Before I let you go, we're heading up into this election cycle where all of our House members are running right now for re-election. You don't have to right now. What is your focus and what's your main goal that you're trying to accomplish in the months to come?
Well, look, as we head into the election, first and foremost, we want to see Americans casting their vote in favor of President Trump, not in favor of President Biden. I'm also focused a lot on having people vote for and support Republican Senate candidates across the country. I've also thrown my support behind Colby Jenkins in the 2nd Congressional District. He's a literal war hero. He wants to come to Washington, and he wants to stand up to the swamp, to the firm, to the uniparty, and vote against big spending bills, to stand athwart this monster that is making life unaffordable and untenably expensive for Utahns everywhere. So I'm focused on those things.
Are you backing anyone in the Utah Senate race right now?
I'm not. I reserve the right to get into those if I choose. I've never gotten involved in primaries involving that seat, in part because, whoever wins that is somebody I'll be working with in the end. So at this point, I don't have plans to get involved in that primary.
Anything else you'd want your constituents at home to know right now? Look, we're living at a time where a lot of our institutions are under attack, and where at times it seems like our country is dangerously off course. I don't believe that our country is dangerously off course so much as I believe that our government is, our federal government in particular. The state government in Utah works pretty darn well. I wish very frequently that we could exchange the government we have in Utah, send it to Washington and have it run the federal government. It would run much better. But we have a healthy, vibrant country. It's our federal government that's the problem. The good news is that our people remain in control of their government, and so long as they show up and they exercise their right to vote, and they do so after informing themselves of the issues, I have every confidence that they've got the power and will exercise that power so as to bring about changes in government that will work to everyone's benefit. As we head towards the election, last question here. Democrats have always done a better job at getting young people out to vote. Republicans have not been as good at that in elections in the past. What will it take to get young people excited about the Republican Party right now?
Well, look, at a time when, youth often are known for wanting to be against the establishment, sort of stick it to the man. There's nothing more establishment, nothing more stick it to the man than to want to stand up to the behemoth in Washington that's costing them so much money, that's threatening their ability to pursue the American dream as their parents have. I have every hope and confidence that young voters in America are seeing what's happening in Washington and that they're going to vote for a change.
All right, Senator, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks so much. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.